Please no joke, this is actually serious. Also, this is a throwaway account and I was an idiot when writing my name and typed throwaway instead of throwra. I have been with my boyfriend for 3 months now, so it's pretty new. So far everything is going well except this tiny little detail. He has this teddy bear, let's name him Teddy. Teddy has always been a part of my boyfriend's life. He got him for his birth and when at around the age of 5 or 6, or whatever age is the appropriate age to remove a teddy bear from a child, his parents tried taking Teddy away from him. He screamed and cried so loud without stopping they ended up giving up. So he kept Teddy with him his whole life. He mentioned Teddy to me pretty early, about a week after us being together. He showed me pictures of him and I found it cute at first. He had plenty of pictures of him in different situations, him with a mug, him laying in bed, him studying. I truly found it adorable since I thought it was just a joke really and didn't think that Teddy was such a big part of his life. The more we got to know each other the more he started mentioning him. He'd often make jokes about him. When he had to come back to his flat, he'd say, "I have to come back, Teddy is waiting for me." And then later he'd text me, "Okay, I put Teddy to bed so now I might go to sleep as well, I don't want to wake him up." Again, a little weird but cute still. But he really started talking about him constantly, always linking what we were doing to him. Oh, I wish Teddy was with us to see that. Teddy doesn't really like people so I won't take him with me for this party, etc. He'd send me selfies with him at least twice a week. He also sometimes said weird stuff like whenever we watched a sex scene in a movie he'd say that's what me and Teddy do when we're alone. Or when I asked when he lost his virginity he answered, "Oh, I lost it with Teddy a few years ago." They were jokes that made me uncomfortable. He always seems to consider him as a baby, his son, his brother, so him being sexualized was extremely weird for me. I told him then that it was weird and he just laughed but I don't think he took me seriously. About a month ago I told him I was okay with him bringing Teddy when he was staying around my flat. I could see it was making him sad to leave him, and also was very curious to finally see him in person. I can't go to my boyfriend's flat, there are rules that are strict, he can't invite anyone. So that day I drove to his flat and he went with all his stuff and Teddy. When he got in the car he pulled him out from his bag and had him give me a kiss on the cheek. When we drove, he opened the window and put Teddy out of the car, a bit like a dog would. He said it was rare for Teddy to travel like that and he could feel that he was happy. Teddy smells a lot, my boyfriend hasn't washed him in 12 years. For the rest of the car drive, he hugged him and gave him kisses. He has a weird twitch, where he just compulsively pats the back of Teddy. It makes a weird sound because Teddy used to be able to play music when you pressed his belly. He always rubs Teddy's clothes in between his fingers. You can guess that Teddy is in a pretty bad state. He used to be red and now he's just gray. When we're together in bed, he always puts Teddy's mouth on my mouth and I always avoid it as I find it disgusting, and I told him that I hate it but he doesn't listen. He always tries to have Teddy touch my boobs or my arse. When we make love, I often end up finding him in between us and every time I throw him away my BF says oh no he likes to watch. In a joking way. He often mentions us having a threesome with Teddy, him, Teddy, being great at licking. And them always doing kinky stuff together. Now I'm not an idiot. I know communication is important. I tried talking to him so many times. Sometimes in a joking way too so he doesn't feel attacked. Like once, I asked who would he choose if he had to choose between me and Teddy, he said Teddy. But also so many times in a serious way, I told him I didn't like when he was rubbing Teddy on my face and body, I told him I found his relationship with him way too intense and weird. But every time he didn't take it seriously, made jokes, and never truly told me what he thought. I should mention that he is like that for any serious conversation, all he does is make awkward jokes and he never tells me how he feels. He said I love you first because he was drunk. This is becoming hard to handle. I have been away from him for 2 weeks and was kind of relieved I wouldn't see Teddy anymore, but all he did was send pictures, and whenever I asked him what are you doing, or what did you do today, his answer was playing with Teddy. Today he told me I was perfect, which was a first and I sure didn't expect that. He doesn't give a lot of compliments. When he said that I said really? And his reply was, actually no, Teddy is perfect, you come way after him. I just gave up and didn't reply. I have 3 questions. 1. Am I overreacting? Am I the one not being tolerant enough? Am I some boring girlfriend who can't welcome some childishness in her couple? 2. What should I do? Should I let him live his life with Teddy? Should I ask him to make a real choice? Should I ask him to just stop the sexual jokes? Like, who am I to ask such things I don't know? Is it my place to tell him to stop being so weird with his teddy bear? And 3. How do I get him to finally talk to me and take me seriously? TLDR, my BF has a weird relationship with his teddy bear. He considers him as a baby, a son, but still makes very sexual jokes about him, often involving me by having him touch my body, and it's making me uncomfortable. What can I do? Update. I did not expect to get that many replies. I woke up to a crazy amount of messages, so thank you all so much. Now you all really scared me as fuck. I need to see him today, so I will tell you how it went. I'm not sure what to do yet, but I'll definitely have a serious talk with him. I'll try. And then depending on his answer, I'll either give him a chance or say goodbye. Top comments. Chip _ man 5674 How on earth am I still single, Bapadius? Cause you don't have a kick-ass wingman like Teddy, who's willing to do 3 ways and shit. 4 _am _ I bet Teddy looks radiant under a strong black light. But seriously. What the fuck? I've been married for a couple years, and as an average-looking woman I ran into my fair share of weird dudes while dating. But what? If I had told my girlfriends even a light version of this dude's behavior, they would be holding an intervention for me to get away from him ASAP. Even if this was only a strange, immature coping mechanism, it's still not acceptable. The fact that he has strongly implied that he uses Teddy as a masturbation aid. What? I love my husband, but if he started carting around a pocket pussy and made me kiss it, touch it without my consent? If women like OP exist who are willing to put up with shit like this, barring you being some kind of Ted Bundy weirdo, I also have no idea why you're single. Golden Mummies * Teddy Bundy abortion lasagna. So, I'm pretty sure I used to be friends with this dude on Facebook and ended up blocking him. He had several profiles, one for Teddy, and would harass the hell out of women, then blame it on Teddy. He told one of my friends he hopes she gets raped, and then blamed it on Teddy and tried to re-add her on a different account. He has a comic novel or something he's working on about him and Teddy, and he makes the girls who block him or get upset with him the villains they defeat. If it's the same dude, he's out of his fucking mind and you need to run. Edit. I didn't want to unblock the guy's profiles, because I have to wait 48 hours to block him again and he scares me, but I found one of his many profiles that seems to be abandoned. He uses an alias, so I don't know if OP would recognize the name. However, his profile is full of photos of the creepy old bear, so maybe she'll recognize the bear. This is Teddy. I certainly hope there's not 2 of these creepazoids running around. This particular dude has a crime scene photo of a dead rape victim laying face down in a field as his cover photo, so if it's the same dude, she needs to bail, change her phone number and move. Edit 2, thanks, got the gold and silver. The thread is locked now, so I can't reply to anyone, but OP confirmed this is not Teddy. Update. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to you all. I did not expect to get that many comments. I'm safe for those who are worried. You all really scared me though. I had many questions that were asked, so I'm quickly going to reply to the ones I saw the most often. Why are you with this guy? Are you insecure? Why are your standards so low? Etc. I obviously didn't write down his nicest description. Apart from this weird teddy bear fetish, he was a completely normal guy, with friends, going to parties, studying and so on. He's quite the popular guy, in fact, even though I don't care about this kind of thing. He took me on dates and made me feel special. I really thought he was a keeper. At the beginning, him being a little childish didn't bother me. I myself have stuffed pets, and even though they're in the cupboard, I used to love them as a kid. That's when he started sexualizing his bear and involving me in it that I freaked out. The problem is, it's so hard to tell when he's joking or not. He constantly makes jokes. That's why I never could tell whether I was overreacting or not. Is he just joking or does he mean what he says? However, the one thing I really didn't see coming, and you guys helped me realize it, is his lack of respect towards me and my boundaries. Sometimes it's easier to see from an external point of view. This whole time I was too focused wondering whether it was normal or not for me to feel uncomfortable, and I didn't realize that not once did he help me feel more comfortable despite me telling him how I felt. Thank you a lot, because that's the one thing you all really helped me for. I would have probably taken more time to realize it on my own, even though it now looks obvious. About the guy who said he knew him, abortion lasagna. Unfortunately, it wasn't him. Thank you so much for your help though. Run away, he's going to kill you. He's a psychopath, etc. Although his behavior is extremely weird, I don't see him hurting anyone. But obviously it's easier for me to tell since you all had to base your opinion on what I said. He doesn't match the psychopath personality at all. I'm not allowed to visit him because he lives in a private home, a person hosts him in one of their bedrooms, and this person doesn't allow any visit. It is weirdly strict, yes, but it's believable, and I've seen his sister once who confirmed that she couldn't visit him herself. One thing is sure though, although he may not hurt anyone, he seems to have serious problems and I'm not sure I can handle it. It's fake, It looks like the movie Ted. I know it all looks surreal, but it is true. I have multiple pictures of Teddy if some of you are interested. I know a lot about Teddy's past because my BF won't shut up about him. That's why I know the movie Ted, but I have never seen it, and my BF actually suggested that we could watch it like a month ago. Burn Teddy. Make him disappear, etc. Haha, thank you, I did think about it a lot. I often hide him when he brings him in my flat, so I know exactly where he is, and so my BF doesn't think about him. He always ends up looking for him though. But still, it gives me a break. What did you do in the end? I was meant to see him today, so I picked him up and we drove to my flat. Of course Teddy was there, and when he came in the car, my BF had him give me kisses and stuff. I said stop please in a cold way, and he stopped. I said we needed to talk, and he listened because I started crying. I thought it would be hard for me to start talking, but since I was so stressed with all your comments, I just broke down and cried. I told him how I needed him to stop with Teddy, that he needed to stop being so close and dependent on him, that Teddy shouldn't come to my flat anymore. At first he was silent, but then he said he didn't understand why I was so uncomfortable with it, that he was purely joking, that he knew Teddy wasn't real, and that it was hurting him to see that I thought he had a problem. I was extremely disappointed by his reaction and just told him I needed a break. I drove him back to his flat, and that's where I am now. Edit. Everyone is saying the post is deleted, and I have no idea why. It wasn't deleted before. The original post is available in the comments, it's quite easy to find. Thank you to you all for your support. I realized there was a confusion. No, I'm not in his flat. I'm home and safe. Tonight I'll sleep at a friend's so she and I can talk about it, and I'm never going back with him. He sent me terrible messages all night which convinced me to never get back with him. Thank you again for helping me, and have a nice day. I'll send a picture of Teddy for those who want one in a bit, but I have to get ready for school first. Don't worry, the face of my BF won't be shown. Top comments. Ursula Verne. It was hurting him to see that I thought he had a problem. Even if he was joking sometimes, he most certainly does still have a problem given all the stuff he was doing. He's trying to normalize his behavior. It isn't normal. He needs therapy. I'm glad to see you're taking a break and that you're alright, OP. Thanks for the update. Pretty and on seriously. This dude had an ex-girlfriend who didn't like Teddy, and it was implied this was one of the reasons they were no longer together. Brought Teddy everywhere. Repeatedly forced sexual interactions with Teddy on the OP. Wes wouldn't wash or in any way maintain Teddy in a sanitary condition. When OP vocalized her discomfort, would joke it away and continue the behavior. And is so sad that OP thinks he has a problem. What? The F***CK. He clearly has at least one problem. Depending on how much we believe he believes Teddy is real determines what problem that might be. But there's at least one in every possible interpretation of this scenario. ETA. The more I think about this, the more I think him truly believing Teddy is real in some sense is actually the less disturbing problem. Karen won't take our son trick-or-treating, calling Halloween silly. Am I the jerk for insisting she lets him enjoy it? For weeks, my 7-year-old eldest Liam has been giddy with anticipation for Halloween. Convinced that trick-or-treating is the year's high point, he hasn't stopped talking about it. However, I must admit that I find the entire situation somewhat absurd. Although I am aware that Halloween is observed in other nations, it seems absurd to me that we live in Australia. I've never seen any decorations, and it's not customary here, at least not in our neighborhood. In fact, the few placards I've seen openly criticize Halloween because they believe it to be un-Australian. We haven't had a single trick-or-treater come on our door in the 5 years we've been here, but I still buy a large bag of candy every year just in case. Sorry, but it's just not something people do here, I have been saying to Liam. Liam's excitement peaked as Halloween drew near. He was asking to go trick-or-treating, practically jumping off the walls. I attempted to explain that it wasn't typical in this area, but he didn't seem to care. All he wanted to do was dress up and go candy hunting with his 5-year-old brother, Noah, who was just as excited. My wife, Alicia, flatly refused to take them when I brought it up to her. She sneered. It's just a silly American tradition. I want to avoid wasting my time on it. I was annoyed. Alicia wouldn't even think about making things special for Liam, who was all fired up for something he perceived as amazing. I attempted to talk her out of it, but she refused to listen. She insisted, I have better things to do. The issue was that I was unable to take them myself because I had a work trip planned that would take me away on Halloween. Perhaps you could take them out for a short while. I recommend it. She gave a headshake. I simply fail to see the purpose. I would want to unwind at home. Halloween is nothing more than an exaggerated candy grab. I grew increasingly irritated the more I considered it. It felt unfair to deprive our children the opportunity to celebrate something that so many others get to, and I didn't want to start a fight. I began thinking that, even if it meant defying Alicia's desires, I should just take kids to a neighborhood where trick-or-treating is accepted. I finally said, "I can't believe you won't even consider it," after a long day of back and forth. It's the only night of the year, so they're thrilled. Is this asking for too much? Alicia's face was set in defiance as she crossed her arms. Perhaps you should have considered that before planning your trip if you truly care that much. I'm not going to do it, it's absurd. Dejected, I took out my phone to research Halloween activities. Even if Alicia is reluctant, perhaps I could find a way to make it work if I couldn't take them. Update. At last, I discovered a neighborhood gathering that provided a secure environment for trick-or-treating. Since it's before I depart for my trip, I made the decision to take them there personally. Even if it meant getting some blowback from Alicia for defying her wishes, I couldn't wait to see the joy on their faces. This entire circumstance has been the final nail in the coffin. I eventually made the decision to inform Alicia that I wanted a divorce because I've been tired of her attitude for a long time. I'm currently cleaning up our house, which she essentially ruined before leaving to live with her sister, and she handled it about as well as I had anticipated. I want a brand new hot tub. Is this a literal white elephant gift and upkeep nightmare? Should I keep or sell? Original post. Like the title says, I won the grand prize in a raffle. It's a beautiful 6-person hot tub, and I would love to own one someday. The thought of snowboarding all day and coming home to a hot tub soak sounds amazing. I do have a backyard that has room for it, but I would need to get electrical outlets added, would need to flatten the ground for a concrete pad, possibly get plumbing, then there's the delivery, accessories and upkeep. Are there any frugal hot tub owners out there? What is upkeep like? Do you really use it often enough to justify the cost? I'm not afraid to do the hard work necessary to install it, but wondering if in the long run am I wasting all this money to upkeep costs? My wife keeps suggesting that we sell it and use it for a trip. What do you think? Some of OOP's comments, relevant comments. Commenter. I installed a hot tub at my last house. If you are going to use it and enjoy it, it's never going to be cheap. Chemical and water costs aren't too bad, and in my opinion it's not that much of a hassle. But leaving the tub on 24/7 365 has considerable electricity costs, especially if you're in an area cold enough to snowboard. Our hot tub was costing us about $200 a month to run in the winter, and about $50 a month in the summer. And that's just water, electricity, and chemicals. That doesn't include repair and maintenance costs, which are low the first few years but get intense once the tub gets older. Personally, I want to be using it a few times a week to have it feel worthwhile. It was worth it for me at the time, but I don't think I'd make the choice now. I'd just go on an extra couple of Airbnb weekends at places with hot tubs. I've decided that outdoor saunas are much cheaper and easier to use and maintain. That's what I'll be looking at for my next home instead of a hot tub. OOP, all good advice, thank you. Commenter, they will have a cash value but that doesn't mean they can take the cash instead. A lot of times companies donate them as a write-off and they get the benefit of marketing and exposure. You don't have the choice between the prize and cash. OOP. This is most likely the case with my prize. I think I'd have to sell it on the FB marketplace or something similar. Commenter, check first. Why would you assume this is most likely the case? And now that I'm so invested in this, let me know. OOP. It was a raffle at the birthday party at the company my wife works at. The hot tub place is next door and was donated to the raffle after the owner did a work for trade thing with their business. So knowing a little of the behind-the-scenes maneuvering, I'm fairly sure it's a write-off donation and there's no cash prize equivalent. But I'm still going to ask. Commenter, did you have to provide your SSN when you accepted it? That would be a red flag of getting taxed on it. OOP, I haven't accepted it yet. Someone reminds OOP they'd probably need a permit and/or inspections. Didn't even think about the permits and municipal inspection. Good points, thank you. Commenter, OMG, my dream, keep it. OP, it was my dream too. I went to the raffle specifically to try and win the hot tub, so now that my dream came true I'm really trying to make the happy ending work. After all these comments I'm leaning toward selling it. The power costs are definitely a factor where I am. It's already been 300 plus some months. Commenter, snowboarder with hot tub here. Do it, you'll never regret it. OOP, damn it, LOL, the choice is so hard. I may try and see if they will do a sauna instead. Bought a season pass to Brighton this year, gonna be up there a lot. Commenter, where are you located? I'm in the market for one if you're looking to sell and we happen to be not too far. Feel free to PM if you'd like. OOP, Utah. Update post. Thank you all for so many helpful comments. Like I said, I was super excited to own a hot tub. I thought I had the perfect spot for it and was ready to do everything I could to get it installed. All the commenters brought up a lot of great points that I didn't consider. One was the increase in energy bills. Our electricity has recently undergone a 30% hike and in the summer is over $300 a month now. Adding a hot tub in the winter would have added $100-$200 per month to that bill, as we live in a cold, snowy climate. Two was the spot we picked out for it. After measuring where we thought it would go, we realized the spot wasn't big enough to fit the tub and we would have to put it somewhere that had a bit more room. This meant I would have had to run a longer electrical line, had to rip out part of an edged pathway and build a new gravel pad. The new spot had no privacy. It was in direct view of the neighbor's window, so adding some sort of privacy barrier would have been another cost. And it was still 20 feet from where we wanted it, which means in the winter I'd have to shovel a walkway to it and clear it all off. I know in the winter this is going to be a big factor in not using it, because it wouldn't be convenient to get to. There was the HOA, and resale of the home. A lot of people mentioned that hot tubs can be considered a liability to the home when selling, as well as issues with HOAs, permits, and inspections. That wasn't something we considered, and while we do plan on being in this home for a while, it's not our forever home. And 4 was the total cost and taxes. It will be reported to the IRS as a $10,000 prize, so I imagine I'd have to pay anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500 extra taxes next year, in addition to the $2,000 I would have had to spend on the electrician, adding a gravel pad, delivery fees, as well as the increase in water and power bills monthly. That could be something like $5,000 getting everything up and running and installed, and not something I anticipated spending before Christmas. So, here's what I did instead. I asked the owner of the hot tub place if I could convert the hot tub I want into a sauna instead, and he said yes. So I'm getting a super nice infrared indoor sauna that will sit inside my basement. It doesn't need expensive new power lines run, and no other associated upkeep costs going forward other than the power used. All in all, I'm super happy with the outcome. A tiny bit disappointed I don't get to soak in a hot tub, but I can still go snowboarding all day and come home to a nice heat soak. Thanks again, everyone. Some of OOP's comments. Commenter: that's a bloody clever solution. I love that you negotiated. Very few people realize that negotiation gets results. See why Flora is about to recruit an entire office building to negotiate with the landlords about getting some much needed accessibility upgrades. I mean, I'm a mediator, so I would say this. But jolly good for you anyway. OOP. Thank you. Someone in the original thread mentioned a sauna and it got me thinking. I work with a lot of small businesses, so I'm used to negotiating and finding solutions. Commenter: and the post doesn't include the chemicals that are added to the water regularly. OOP. A lot of the original commenters said that those weren't too expensive, so I didn't include that, but definitely a factor as well. Commenter: saunas are such a godsend and genuinely beneficial for your health. Brilliant move. And I know sauna rooms can be a nice incentive when selling OOP. Good to hear. We went with an infrared one because of the health benefits. I'm excited to try it out. My son tried to kick me out of my home to finance his dream house and start his own family. I am a 65M single parent, having spent the past 32 years alone. Laura, my wife, died while our son Gary was just 3 years old. She got in an automobile accident on her way home from work, hence the loss was abrupt and terrible. We were a happy family of 3 one minute, then I was left to raise our small kid by myself. Early on, those years were really demanding. At the time, I was a high school English teacher and suddenly I had to balance my employment with full-time parent duties. On evenings when I would sit on Gary's room's floor observing him sleep, I would wonder how I would handle it all. Still, we managed daily to make it work. Over the years, I gave up a great deal. Promotions that would have needed more travel or longer hours declined. Gary always came first, so I missed out on social events and dating possibilities. I never, however, objected to it. Gary was my universe. Seeing him develop into a content, healthy young man made all the difference. Things grew simpler in some respects and more difficult in others as Gary aged. While the emotional obstacles of parenting a child were more pronounced, the practical ones became lessened. Gary began to probe his mother more, and I tried to preserve her memory for him. Together, we would review picture albums and I would share anecdotes about her. Though it was complicated, I wanted him to know how much Mom had loved him. Gary and I had a wonderful connection in spite of the obstacles. We were great buddies, not only father and son. We both loved sports, especially baseball, and some of my best recollections are of Gary being taught to throw in our backyard. We used weekends for hiking or camping as he grew older. When Gary was admitted into a decent college, I felt really proud. Watching him pack for his dorm room was mixed, but I was happy for him to begin this next phase of his life. Over his college years, we kept in close proximity. I loved those talks as he would call me for guidance on everything from his studies to girl problems. Gary returned home after college in search of work. He ran across Jane during this period. She came from a rich background, was clever and attractive. Though at first I was glad Gary had discovered someone who brought him great delight, over time I began to see changes in his conduct. Always talking about the beautiful places Jane took him to or the costly gifts her parents bought, he grew increasingly preoccupied with worldly objects. Reminding myself that Gary was a mature man entitled to live his life any way he wanted, I tried not to let it disturb me. But the sensation that he was transforming into someone I didn't know persisted. Though I had reservations, I was glad for Gary and Jane when they declared they were getting married. Though Gary insisted Jane's parents were paying for everything, I volunteered to assist with wedding expenses. The wedding was an opulent event considerably more grand than anything our family was accustomed to. Among Jane's friends and family, I felt awkward. Yet I put up a courageous front for Gary's benefit. Gary and Jane moved into a lovely property in an affluent area following the wedding. That was quite different from the little house Gary had grown up in. Occasionally I was asked there for supper, but in their contemporary house I always felt like an outsider. Jane was courteous but aloof, and I sensed she considered me as embarrassing. Gary disappeared from my view as the years passed. His high-powered career and new way of life occupied him. Our talks felt surface level. Although I missed my kid, I reminded myself that this was inevitable in raising a new family. Then around 6 months ago, I decided to do something that would fundamentally alter everything. I choose to call it quits on instruction. After 40 years in the classroom, I thought it was time. I was 65. Having extra free time excited me, maybe for vacation or a new hobby pickup. Gary's response when I informed him I wanted to retire startled me. He appeared worried rather than delighted for me. Inquiring about my financial condition, he wanted to know whether I had enough stored up. I reassured him that throughout the years I had been frugal with my money and had a reasonable pension. Though I wasn't wealthy by any means, I had enough to live reasonably. Gary advised me then to sell my house and live with Jane and him. The proposition immediately appealed to me. It seemed to me as evidence that Gary wanted to reconnect and have me play a more major role in his life once more. Then he began discussing the value of my house and how the sales proceeds would benefit us all. I liked my house. It was where Gary had grown up and where we had created many treasured memories. I never gave it any thought. I told Gary I was glad where I was, even though I appreciated the offer. Though he appeared let down, he avoided raising the matter. Gary began phoning more regularly over the next 2 weeks. Every time he would bring up my selling the house notion. He discussed how I might help them at home and how everyone would benefit from it. His tenacity began to irritate me. Then, about a month after I retired, Gary and Jane showed up at my place without warning. They claimed to want to discuss my housing circumstances. Jane spoke much of the time, outlining their intended family starting point and how great it would be to have me there to assist with the grandchildren. Her voice, though, seemed strange. She seemed to be pitching me something. It was obvious as the discussion progressed what they truly desired. Though they needed more money for the down payment, they were looking at a larger house in an even more upscale area. They reasoned that if I sold my house and lived with them, I could put the money toward their new house. I would have a room in their house in exchange and live among their family. Using the promise of family intimacy to gain my money, they seemed to be trying to control me. I told them straight out I had no intention of investing in theirs or selling my house. Gary was irate, but Jane remained calm and said they were simply trying to support me. I shook when they went. My kid, the small lad I had reared on my own, would try to pressure me in this way, and I couldn't believe it. Over the next few days, I considered our relationship and sought to identify when things had gone so wrong. 1 week later, Gary gave a call. This time his voice was different. He claimed they had no option but to handle things as I was not ready to be sensible. He told me the house I was living in belonged really to him. I remembered putting the house in both our names when Gary turned 18, even though I had bought it when he was a small boy. Never expecting he would turn it against me, I saw it as a means of ensuring his future. Gary claimed to be co-owner and intended to sell the house as he was entitled to do so. What I was hearing, my own kid was threatening to sell the roof over my head, wrangled me. Saying that this was my house, I objected and Gary said, "You're retired now, Dad. You simply are an old useless man. We have a future to consider, Jane and I." The next several weeks were a misery. Beginning to show real estate brokers, Gary and Jane insisted on offering house tours. They dismissed my objections, as though I were not even here. Watching strangers move through my own house, I felt like a ghost. I once listened in the kitchen as Jane spoke with Gary. She didn't know I was in the room next door. "We have to clear the useless old bones from here," she remarked. "I find it amazing that you let him freeload for so long." Gary's answer was just as nasty. "Don't worry, we will have him gone shortly. He has had his time, now it is ours." I collapsed. For now the son I had given everything saw me as nothing more than a burden. Lost and alone, I didn't know what to do going forward. That's where I find myself right now. My son and daughter-in-law are aggressively trying to sell my house out from under me. They have made it abundantly evident that they consider me as nothing more than a worthless old bone getting in the way of their ambitions. About my future, I'm frightened, angry and wounded. At 65, I never thought I would be in this situation facing possible homelessness from the avarice of my own child. How did my relationship with my son get here? Update 1. It's been a month since I last posted and I can't believe how much has transpired. The issue with Gary and Jane has only worsened, and I find myself in a position I never imagined conceivable. Following my initial post, I resolved to take action. I couldn't simply sit back and let Gary and Jane sell my house from beneath me. I contacted an old friend, Dean, who is a lawyer. I've known Dean since college, and he's always been there for me. When I explained the problem, he was outraged and offered to assist me pro gratis. Dean investigated the legal issues of my circumstance. It turns out that, while Gary's name appears on the deed, there are regulations that protect me as a long-term resident. Dean stated that Gary could not simply force me out or sell the house without my approval. This gave me a little sense of relief, but I knew the war wasn't done. I've decided to confront Gary and Jane. I asked them over for supper, expecting that in a quiet, familiar setting, we could have a logical conversation. I spent the entire day preparing Gary's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings. It was the same dish I made for his birthday every year as he grew up. When they arrived, we sat down to eat, and it felt nearly like old times. We exchanged casual conversation regarding work and weather. I finally decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room. I informed them about my conversation with Dean. I stated that what they were attempting to do was not only ethically reprehensible, but potentially unlawful. I hoped that the knowledge would cause them to reconsider their actions. Gary's reply did not meet my expectations. Instead of backing down, he became infuriated. He accused me of threatening him and attempting to influence him using legal jargon that I did not understand. Jane jumped in, stating I was selfish and jeopardizing their future. I tried to remain cool, explaining that I was not threatening anyone. I just wanted to keep my house, where I had raised Gary and where we had shared so many memories. However, my comments appeared to go unheard. After dinner, Gary and Jane stormed out, leaving me alone with a table full of half-eaten food. I spent the night reading through old photo albums, looking at images of Gary as he grew up. I couldn't connect the happy youngster in those images with the man attempting to take away my home. The next day, I received a letter from the law company that represents Gary and Jane. They were disputing my right to stay in the residence, saying that Gary, as co-owner, had the authority to sell. The letter was full of legal jargon that I didn't understand, but the message was clear: they were willing to take this to court. I quickly called Dean. He calmed me, but told me that court battles may be exhausting, both emotionally and financially. He warned me to be ready for a tough struggle. Over the next 3 weeks, my life was occupied by legal consultations and paperwork. Dean was quite helpful, explaining everything in language I could understand and guiding me through the process, but it was exhausting. I couldn't sleep because I was so scared about what was about to happen. During this time, I also began reaching out to old acquaintances and coworkers. I hadn't realized how secluded I'd been in recent years, focusing solely on Gary and his family. It was a relief to reconnect with individuals who knew me and recalled what a good parent I had been to Gary. One of these individuals, my former coworker Susan, promised to let me stay with her if things became really terrible. It was comforting to know I had somewhere to go if the worst happened, but the prospect of leaving my home shattered my heart. As the legal battle progressed, Gary and Jane's methods became increasingly aggressive. They began spreading stories across the neighborhood that I was mentally ill and needed to be placed in a care facility. Some neighbors I'd known for years began avoiding me, giving me weird stares as we passed on the street. Stress was having a toll on my health. I found myself always weary and lost my appetite. My doctor warned me about the consequences of stress at my age and recommended some sleep aids, but medications couldn't relieve the agony in my heart that accompanied every thought of Gary. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I had an unexpected visitor. It was Jane's mother, Elizabeth. I had only met her a few times at family gatherings, and we had never been close. She appeared embarrassed as she stood on my porch, but I politely invited her in. Over a cup of tea, Elizabeth explained why she had come. She had overheard Gary and Jane discussing their plans and was appalled. She told me that she and her husband had no idea what Gary and Jane were doing and did not agree. Elizabeth apologized for her daughter's actions and offered to help in any way she could. After everything that had transpired, it was difficult to trust anyone connected to Gary and Jane, but as we spoke, I could tell Elizabeth was genuinely distressed about the situation. She told anecdotes about her own father, who had lived with her in his latter years. She couldn't imagine treating a parent the same way Gary and Jane treated me. Before she went, Elizabeth handed me an envelope. There was a large check inside. She encouraged me to accept it, stating it would help with legal bills or whatever else I needed. I was astonished by her generosity and attempted to reject it, but she wouldn't have it. She made me promise that I would let her know if I needed anything else. It was good to hear that not everyone in Gary's new family agreed with his conduct, but it also made me sad to think that my son's in-laws were treating me better than he was. The court battle dragged on. Gary and Jane's lawyers were aggressive, launching every legal argument they could think of at us. Dean was doing a wonderful job of defending me, but the constant back and forth was exhausting. On a particularly rough day, I found myself sitting in the garden, gazing at the old treehouse Gary and I had built together when he was 10. It was aged and faded, but still standing. I remembered the summer we spent building it, Gary's delight as we pounded each nail, and the pride in his eyes when we were done. Now that same boy was attempting to take away the house where we had shared so many good memories. As I sat there, deep in meditation, my phone vibrated with a text. It came from Gary, our first direct communication in weeks. The message was quick and cold. "Dad, this is your final opportunity. Agree to sell your house and move in with us, or we'll make sure you get nothing." This was not the son I had reared. The Gary I knew would never have threatened his own father in this way. I did not respond to the text, but I did keep it. Dean had told me to keep track of all communication between Gary and Jane. The next day, I had a meeting set with Dean to discuss our future strategy. As I was about to depart, I heard a disturbance outside. I peeked out the window and saw Gary and Jane in the front yard, supervising a crew of workers putting up a for sale sign. I raced outdoors, wanting to know what was going on. Gary claimed they were simply prepared for the inevitable. I informed them they had no right to put up a sign because the house was not for sale. Jane laughed and replied, "It will be soon enough, old man." I stood there helplessly, watching the workers finish putting up the sign. Neighbors started to emerge from their homes, curious about the disturbance. That night, I was unable to sleep. I continued repeating the day's events in my head, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I found myself thinking about Laura and what she would say if she could see what our boy had become. The next morning, I awoke to see my front yard packed with people. Gary and Jane had arranged an open house without my knowledge or consent. Potential buyers were roaming through my house, inspecting my belongings as if I weren't even present. I was infuriated. I called Dean immediately, and he encouraged me to capture everything. So I started filming and photographing the guests in my house, making sure to capture Gary and Jane's features properly. Some of the potential purchasers became uneasy when they realized I was the homeowner and had not authorized this open house. As the day progressed, more and more people showed up. Gary and Jane were excellent guests, taking people around my property and pointing out highlights as if they had the authority to market it. I overheard Jane informing one couple that they were assisting her poor, bewildered father-in-law in making the transfer to assisted living. The brazen deception infuriated me. I attempted to speak with some of the possible purchasers to explain the issue, but Gary and Jane kept interrupting me and guiding people away. At one point, Gary told someone that I was not quite right in the head. By the end of the day, I was both exhausted and heartbroken. After the last potential buyer had left, Gary and Jane remained, apparently satisfied with themselves. Gary had the arrogance to tell me that the open house was a huge success, with several interested parties. He told me I should start packing my belongings. I could not handle it anymore. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt spilled forth. I told Gary just how I felt about him. How selfish and greedy he'd become. I reminded him of all the sacrifices I had made and the love I had shown him. I questioned him how he could do this to me, in remembrance of his mother. For a brief moment I thought I saw a glimpse of the old Gary in his eyes, but when Jane murmured something in his ear, his countenance hardened. He said I was living in the past and needed to recognize that things had changed. They then went, leaving me alone in the house, which no longer seemed like home. That night I reached a choice. I couldn't keep living this way, always on edge, waiting for the next thing to happen. I needed to gain control of the situation. I called Dean and informed him that I wanted to pursue more aggressive legal action. He cautioned me that things may get ugly, that Gary and Jane might retaliate even more harshly, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to fight for my home and my dignity. The following few weeks were filled with legal meetings and court appearances. Gary and Jane's lawyers threw everything they could at us, but Dean was great. He produced evidence of their harassment, including video footage from the unauthorized open house. He battled over my rights as a long-term resident and co-owner of the property. Throughout it all, Gary and Jane sat in the courtroom, chatting to each other and their lawyers while rarely glancing at me. It was as if they no longer saw me as a person, but as a barrier to be overcome. The stress of the legal struggle was getting to me. I lost weight and had difficulty sleeping. My doctor was concerned about my blood pressure and emphasized the significance of attempting to remain calm. But how could I remain calm while my own son attempted to make me homeless? As the court case reached its conclusion, I had another unexpected visit, this time from Jane's father, Robert. He, like his wife, appeared uneasy as he stood on my porch. I allowed him in, wondering what had brought him here. Robert was straightforward. He informed me that he was ashamed of his daughter's actions and disappointed in Gary. He claimed that he and Elizabeth had raised Jane to be better than this and couldn't understand what had changed her. Then Robert did something unexpected. He offered to buy out Gary and Jane's half of my house. He stated he couldn't stand by while they destroyed our family for money. His offer startled me, and I had no idea how to answer. Robert assured me that this was not charity. He said that he and Elizabeth had already planned to make Jane and Gary a hefty down payment on a new house. Instead, they planned to use the money to buy out Gary's part in my residence. This manner, I could stay in my home while Gary and Jane received the money they desired. Robert's kindness surpassed my expectations. It appeared too good to be true, the ideal solution to this misery. However, I was also suspicious. I'd been hurt too many times in the previous months to trust lightly. I told Robert that I needed time to consider his offer and discuss it with my lawyer. He understood and handed me his card, asking me to phone him when I had made a decision. The next morning, I called Dean and informed him of Robert's offer. He cautioned me to tread cautiously. We agreed to meet with Robert to discuss the details. The meeting was held in the dean's office a few days later. Robert brought his own lawyer, and we spent hours discussing the details of the proposition. By the end of the meeting, we had reached an arrangement that appeared fair to all. Under the terms of the agreement, Robert would buy out Gary's part in the house, giving him and Jane the funds they needed for their new home. In exchange, I would maintain full ownership of my home. Of course, there were some conditions. I had to commit not to sell the house for at least 5 years, and if I did decide to sell later, Gary and Jane would have first refusal. It wasn't a flawless solution, but it was better than I could have expected. I would keep my home, while Gary and Jane would receive their money. Maybe, I thought, this will be the end of the war. I should have known better. When Gary and Jane learned about the arrangement, they were enraged. They accused Robert and Elizabeth of interfering, siding with me against their own daughter. Gary called me, raving about how I had turned his in-laws against him. I tried to explain that this was a fantastic solution for everyone and that they were still receiving what they wanted, but Gary refused to listen. He claimed I poisoned Jane's parents against them and was manipulating everyone. Gary closed our talk by informing me he never wanted to see me again. He stated that he no longer regarded himself as having a father. These comments wound worse than everything else that had transpired. Despite Gary and Jane's misgivings, the transaction went through. Robert bought out Gary's part in the house, making me the only owner. The legal proceedings had been concluded and the for sale sign had been taken from my front yard. In the weeks that followed, I attempted to return to normal. I started taking better care of myself, eating correctly and exercising. I heard through the grapevine that Gary and Jane had purchased their dream home in the exclusive community they'd been looking at. I wondered if they were content, if the money and the large house were worth everything they'd done to obtain them. As the months went, I gradually came to terms with everything. Final update. It's been a while, about 2 years after the court struggle finished. One day, I got an unexpected delivery in the mail. It came from Jane's parents, Robert and Elizabeth. The contents included a photo album and a letter. The letter mentioned that they had been browsing through old family photos and discovered several pictures of Gary from various family occasions throughout the years. They thought I'd want to have them. It was a wonderful gesture that I greatly appreciated. The last page of the album had a surprise. A recent photo of Gary and Jane posing in front of their new home showed Jane holding a little placard that read "Baby on board." They were planning to become parents. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photograph. I was about to become a grandfather. It was something I had fantasized about for years, teaching my grandchildren to play catch or telling them goodnight stories. Now it was happening, but I didn't know if I'd ever get to meet this youngster. That night I wrote Gary a note. I obtained their address from the return label. In the letter, I congratulated him on the baby and expressed my happiness for him. I told him I understood if he didn't want me in his life, but I hoped we could reconcile someday. I told him I loved him and would always love him, no matter what happened. I mailed the letter the next day, not anticipating any reaction. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing. I tried to put it out of my mind and concentrate on the positive things in my life, but I couldn't stop thinking about Gary and the baby. Then, around 8 months after I submitted the letter, I was outside watering my flowers when a car pulled up. To my surprise, Gary exited. He looked different, older and more serious. He stood there for a bit, simply looking at me, before approaching and hugging me without saying anything. It was strange at first, but I could feel him relax, so I hugged back. We remained there for a moment, neither speaking. Gary's eyes welled up with emotions as we parted ways. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "I'm so sorry." We stepped inside and Gary shared his heart over cups of coffee. He told me how ashamed he was of his actions, and how the burden of trying to fit into Jane's environment had shifted his focus. He claimed that being a father made him understand how badly he had treated me. Gary stated that he and Jane had been going through some difficult times. The stress of the new house, the baby on the way, and the guilt over what they'd done to me had all put a strain on their relationship. They'd started couples counseling, which had helped Gary see how far he'd wandered from the ideals I'd instilled in him. I listened to Gary's apology and explanation. As he spoke, I saw the guy I'd raised, the gentle, sensitive son who had been my best friend for so many years. But I could see changes in him. He was more mature and mindful of the implications of his behavior. Gary informed me about the baby, a young girl due in a few months. He explained that he and Jane had done a lot of thinking and wanted me to be a part of their child's life. I was moved by the offer, but I made it clear that things could not simply return to normal. Too much had occurred. There had been too many harsh words and actions. If we were to continue our relationship, we needed to agree on new conditions. Gary understood. He advised we start slowly, perhaps meeting for coffee once a week, and gradually restore our friendship. I agreed. As Gary was leaving, he paused at the door. "Dad," he began, "I know I have no right to ask, but would you consider being present when the baby is born? I really want my daughter to meet her grandfather." The request astonished me and left me feeling conflicted. I wanted nothing more than to be present for my granddaughter's birth, but should I trust Gary and Jane? Finally, I told Gary I would think about it. He nodded, acknowledging my hesitation. Over the next 2 months, Gary and I met for coffee on a regular basis, occasionally with Jane. These sessions were frequently awkward at first, as we all danced around the elephant in the room. However, we gradually began to ease around each other. Jane apologized for her role in what had occurred. She added that she had felt a lot of pressure from her parents to marry up and provide a specific lifestyle. She'd become engrossed with materialism and lost sight of what was truly important. Pregnancy had also served as a wake-up call for her. I appreciated Jane's apologies, but as with Gary, I made it plain that re-establishing trust would take time. She seems to understand and respect my boundaries. Gary called me 2 weeks before the due date, panicked. Jane had gone into labor early and was on her way to the hospital. I did not hesitate to meet him there. I spent the following few hours pacing the hospital waiting room. Gary came out at regular intervals to provide me with updates. After what felt like a lifetime, Gary emerged with a big smile on his face. "Dad, do you want to meet your granddaughter?" I followed Gary inside the room. Jane was in bed, fatigued but delighted, holding the tiniest, most precious little bundle I'd ever seen. Gary carefully removed the baby from Jane and delivered her to me. "Dad, meet Lily Laura." My granddaughter was stunning when I first held her. Her middle name is Laura, which is the name of my late wife. I looked at Gary and questioned him. He cracked a grin and continued. "We wanted her to have a piece of grandma, to honor the amazing parents who raised me." Over the next few months, I spent as much time as possible with Lily. Gary and Jane were fantastic in incorporating me into her life. My friendship with Gary and Jane also improved. We talked more honestly about what had happened and worked through our concerns. So that is it, Reddit. That is my experience over the last 2 years. I appreciate all of the helpful suggestions you've given me, but it's time for me to quit writing and spend more time with my family. I found a tampon in my husband's car and another in our bedroom. Our youngster suddenly got new clothes that I didn't buy, so I assumed he was cheating. For 7 years, married for 4, I, 29F, have been with my spouse, 30M. I have never had cause to fear he was even slightly unhappy with our marriage or even disloyal to me. He enjoys making jokes about us still experiencing the honeymoon phase with 2 children in tow almost 5 years. Had it not for the shocking discovery in his car last month, I would not have questioned it or him. I saw something slatted between the cushions when buckling our daughter into her car seat. Pulling it out, I found it to be a tampon. Had I not had an IUD stopping my period for the past year and had not even noticed the wrapper type, this would not have been so strange. When I told my husband where I had found it and why I was almost sure it wasn't mine, he seemed not to know what it was, let alone why I was holding it. He shrugged and said most likely Fiona, his coworker, owned it. My husband often commutes to lunch with his colleagues, and as we live somewhat close to Fiona and her husband, I assumed it was quite likely the tampon had dropped out of her bag either any time he had driven with her or given her a ride. Not particularly significant. I dismissed it until a few weeks later, when we had supper with Fiona and her husband. I had so wanted to believe my husband, yet I couldn't get over the way it had been buried in the seat and how my husband had seemed to have no concern for it whatsoever. Perhaps he was acting stupidly. It's unknown. I did something that, looking back, I find really insane. While we were out together, I staged an emergency and asked Fiona whether she carried any tampons. I sighed with relief when she handed me one nearly exactly like the tampon I had discovered in our back seat. Thus, the tampon there was most likely the same one used here, and most likely, there was an innocent explanation for why it had been placed in the back seat in the first place. Until I discovered another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer, I assumed I would have seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene goods. The idea of my husband having an affair makes me physically sick. Even more nauseated the idea that the lady might have left these tampons out for me to find. Should it be my husband's coworker, why would she offer me one the other night and give herself away? Under any other circumstance, I would want to discuss this with my husband. But I feel too ill and ashamed to approach him with what I discovered. What action ought I to take? Comments. I never put a tampon in a sock drawer. I had a period 30 years ago. Trust your gut, then get cameras. Neither does I. I have thought up so many reasons for the tampons that would not point to my spouse, but none of them actually make sense. If it means verifying what I currently suspect, I'm afraid to set up a camera. Has Fiona dropped by your house and had time to plant the tampon? She visited our house numerous times, and vice versa. She wasn't over any time in the past week, hence if she planted that second tampon, she had to have found a window of time when I wasn't home. Every time she and her husband visit, we all stay downstairs. You would have to go rather far to get to our bedroom. That is, past the other bedrooms, around our dogs, over the safety gate. Not saying it's impossible, but on a brief toilet stop it's really difficult. I would guess. Your children's ages are, could they have located a tampon and randomly placed it? 2 and nearly 4. Both have a mischievous streak, hence I didn't want to rule out the chance of one of them shifting stuff around, but I can't see how they could get their hands on 1, maybe 2 odd tampons that I never bought. Update 1. My own hell for the past few weeks has been thinking about every conceivable source of 2 tampons. Nonetheless, I wanted to provide an update. Not long after uploading on here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon from Fiona, my husband's ignorance, the tampon in the back seat and the one in the sock drawer. All the things I suspected but didn't want to accept. The tampons, save from the one I had already thrown away, matched exactly in varying absorbencies. I hadn't left anywhere my husband or daughters would have found them and relocated them. Regarding what they were or where they had come from, my daughters were clueless. With my spouse or without, my sister was sure it was Fiona. She advised asking Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue since direct confrontation of either party still sounded like a horrible idea. Sadly, they already had preparations in mind. Our house for any misplaced or foreign items, there were none. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none, and even the girls for any new friends they could have met. The final aspect was especially important to my sister's husband, and it helped explain his inclination to think the tampons were safe. Given my husband was the one driving the children to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. If anything had been happening in or around our house, he said it would be almost impossible to keep from me and the girls. That helped me somewhat to feel better. I felt differently only till my younger kid, 2 years old, dropped something down last week. My husband demanded that I continue at work while he stayed home with her, even though I wanted to be the one looking after her. I had no problem with that. At that point, We were all already starting to move past the tampon crisis since my sister and her husband considered it as a positive indication that he would take the time off at short notice. By the third or fourth day, I was merely glad to see a nearly healthy child and a spouse supporting her through it. But towards the conclusion of that week, I returned to find something unusual. Now clad in a onesie I had never seen before, the child I had left that morning in an old PJ set had a small clip in her hair. Though I have a very decent idea of what my children wear on a daily basis, especially in terms of attire, I cannot say I have the best recollection. Before we would have our second, I had vowed off full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before. Long snaps are simply a pain in the ass and a no-go for effective diaper changes. Just not something I would dress her in. My hubby knows as much. He definitely doesn't accessorize the girls' clothes and neither does he plan for or buy them. The idea of someone being around our ill child without our awareness confused and rather stunned me. I went straight to inquire whether anyone had been over to visit my spouse or the girls. I didn't second think. Like before, he seemed perplexed and asked me why I would believe that. All day it had been him and the children. Once more, I asked him whether someone had stopped over to say hello. He denied it. I should cool off, he advised. Our oldest daughter was in the room and realized something was wrong, so even if I might have screamed out and came forward with the charges right then and there. My husband swore that the girls had not been with anyone but him. I asked him a third time in a subdued manner if anyone had been near our children. He also denied styling anyone's hair or shopping for new clothing. I chose to leave since our daughter was in the room and my feelings were all over the range. Then I couldn't make sense of it. It hardly looks clearer now after I drove myself mad with illogical arguments. Comments. My 2-year-old can only string a few words at a time to respond to a few inquiries. She responds depending on the cues I provide when I question her about her time with daddy or her wardrobe. I might inquire, "Who gave you that pretty bow?" And she might answer pretty bow back to me, or mama or daddy over and over. Almost 4, my older daughter was in daycare that morning. She cannot remember anything different from that day. Her memory of the PJ change or the hair clip is lacking, hence my estimate is she was changed during that morning, but I'm not sure exactly. My 45-minute trip to work makes stopping for lunch very impractical. My sister has not observed anything unusual. She has been gracious enough to leave work and drive past several times here and there. At the front door is a Ring camera. I have the app on my phone with alerts enabled. Not yet, nothing exists. I'm merely the least tech-savvy person, hence I would be open to suggestions for more covert surveillance, worried another camera will be easy to find. Edit. We indeed routinely test our carbon monoxide detectors. One of the hair clips might have originated from a daycare. Although I could see the hair clip as a possibility, less plausible with the onesie. If either of my younger daughters had returned with something like that before, I would have noticed, especially since it was the kind of onesie I detest with a passion, LOL. She hadn't been to daycare in days. People say they are eager to know how this story ends. The Hollywood horror ending is my financial one. Hopefully, I dreamed about the dogs too so I could at last quit gathering their imagined shits and things. Update 2. I knew I was nowhere with the accusations and half-baked guesses after almost losing my head over a hair clip and a onesie. I wasn't sleeping, eating or taking care of myself the way I should have been since I was so consumed in the paranoia and suffering of my circumstances and I wasn't getting any answers. I thus decided to activate the hidden cameras and have them sent to my sister's house. My brother-in-law agreed to assist with the install/setup at my place. Still, I got my much-needed validation before the cameras were ever delivered. Last week, while I was at work, a Ring alert let me know the motion at the front door. Half expecting to see a delivery person, pet or lawn care salesman for the 15th time, you may picture my astonishment when I watched a footage of a young woman leading my daughter into the house hand in hand with my husband and our other daughter close by. My spouse was at work. The girls were meant to be in childcare. From what I knew, the wife was residing 2 states away under court order keeping her there. I asked my husband straight away what this woman was doing in our house. He ignored me, so I texted him. Knowing I had received the Ring alert, he most likely understood he had messed up by entering the front door and sought to postpone the unavoidable. He was foolish too. But after the 5th or 6th call he at last answered. As I would subsequently learn, the woman on the camera was my husband's sister. She most certainly supplied the bow, the onesie, and the tampons. She is also a recovered addict who spent the better part of her childhood and young adulthood pressuring the silence of another one of my husband's family members following her molestation. She is also a registered sex offender. Years had passed without seeing or hearing from her, and from the way my husband spoke about her, I never expected I would ever would. But here she was, in our house surrounded by our kids. Let me say, I was enraged. Though it was hardly an affair at all, knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening made it much more repulsive. My husband was particularly high on the list since my sister-in-law, fresh out of another stay in recovery, had wanted to rebuild relationships with those she had harmed. My husband had been meeting in secret, usually at our house while I was at work, not wanting me to know, or worse, keep her away from our family and children. They would come in via the garage in my husband's car so the Ring camera at the front entrance wouldn't alert me. She had even stayed in our bed overnight on a weekend when I had gone on a business trip. On a night my husband told me he dropped off our daughters, she watched over them. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow, the identical ones my husband had promised in his life that I had dressed her in myself. My spouse insisted this was all in my head, the tampons, the one piece, the bow, everything else. Shrugging aside each increasingly disturbing revelation like it was news to him and telling me I was being unreasonable, he was quite happy to see me suffer for weeks over a lady he maintained did not exist. 2 years after I had given birth to a child, 4 years after I had told him one of my main worries about parenthood was PPD like my mother had experienced with me. I worried about not being totally present for our children and about having shame and remorse all around as they got older. He advised me to get back off and reassess my mental health. I missed the girls too much and wasn't sleeping enough. Since he was my spouse and since no other way of events made sense, I gave him the benefit of the doubts. After a month of this mental game, I have nothing to show for my trust except this miserable state and a great deal of resentment. Call the cops and a lawyer, comments 1. Reaction. Already on it. We are, believe me, walking burnt ground with this.